war wouldn't have happened, right?
Yeah.
There's no election pressure there in Russia. And yet it contributed to instability. So, if anything, election cycles make politicians more accountable. The lack of election or sham elections give them unbridled power. I don't know if you followed what happened in North Korea. It's like 99.03%. So yeah, we were wondering who this 0.7% were. But no, I think that democracy, I think election cycles, it may appear that in the short term leaders are doing things which do not help a country in the longer term, but that's not always the case. I think that elections make leaders more responsible, more accountable. Today, if one of the things that will put pressure on the American presidency would be the prospect of a midterm election, and they would want to wrap the war. So it may seem like an unfair cost to impose on the people, but elections are the basis of any democracy. However flawed they are, they should be held.
Unguarded.
I just want to come back to the Global South for a moment. I know you've spoken extensively about the Global South asserting itself on the international stage, but I think structurally, the way I look at it, I see the Global South still having these ties to Western capital, to Chinese manufacturing. What do you think is going to take for the Global South to turn that voice into true leverage?
I think it's a very good question, first of all. Why do Global South countries turn to Chinese loans? It's because we have international systems that are fundamentally flawed and biased. For a country like Kenya, for instance, I think it was Kenya, they took an IMF loan, and then the IMF imposed certain conditions, and that sort of unraveled in a way that there were riots and there was a crackdown. So, what instruments do you have? These are countries that want development, these are countries that want jobs, these are countries that want infrastructure, and someone will have to fund it. They have historically been wronged because a lot of them were either looted or colonized. And so, who do they turn to? One option is your World Bank and IMF that only seem to work for certain interests. And the other option is, I won't ask you questions if you give me an airport, that is China. So, for the leader who wants that airport, who wants that railway network, it's a very difficult choice. And they have to make that. They can't say that I don't have a good lender, so let's not have any development. So I think for the Global South, how do you get out of this trap? You get out of this trap by pushing for reform of systems that do not reflect the reality of today. That is the only way to do it.
Just a small follow-up on that. Do you even think that the Global South could also benefit from mutual collaboration, as what we're seeing, let's say, with the AU joining the G20 or with the BRICS even getting stronger? So do you see mutual collaboration as one of the strongest ways for the Global South to grow?
Oh, absolutely. When the biggest powers of the world that created the rule book, as it were, have now thrown it out of the window and will abduct the sitting president. I mean, we laugh about it, but it's a very serious matter. I do not like this regime. I will send my military and pick up the president, and nobody can say anything. So when the rule makers become the biggest rule breakers, then the others have to step up. And Europe, unfortunately, is not stepping up. When Russia invaded Ukraine, the Europeans imposed sanctions. When the US invaded or tried to attack Iran, they did attack Iran, I'm sorry, the Iraq invasion was earlier, the Europeans are saying, let's talk. let's call it, it happened on Saturday, let's call an emergency meeting on Monday. It's a system that does not work. So yes, the Global South countries will have to come together. Again, those systems are not perfect either. For instance, BRICS. BRICS is inherently a club of people who have very many differences. You know, people talk about the BRICS currency. How can you have a common currency with the Chinese? We can't have it. So yes, there are challenges there, but that's the only way for a truly multipolar world to emerge.
Yeah.
The global south countries will have to find ways to build convergence rather than dwell on divergence.
You know, ma'am, it's very interesting that you mentioned the word multipolar because that's what I was thinking about. Is that there's a lot of talk about there being a multipolar world, but when then you look at institutions, be it the IMF, be it the World Bank, we see that the power is still concentrated with very few people. So do you think are we truly moving towards a multipolar world or multipolarity, so to say, or we are just seeing, let's say, a multipolar rhetoric on top of a unipolar infrastructure?
I think that we are moving towards multipolarity. There is a lot of rhetoric, no doubt about it, but there is no option. You know, with the way Donald Trump has ruptured American alliances, with the way he's tried to redraw boundaries and everything that he's done has completely upended the system that the world had come to live with. So even the traditional allies of the US have no option but to look for alternatives. So he has, in a way, fast-tracked the change that was already coming.
So just to follow up on that, do you think this fast-track change will also maybe increase the rate of de-dollarization that one can expect in the future?
Future, yes. The dollar, we love talking about de-dollarization in the media. We say it all the time. It may happen, but it's not going to happen in a hurry. Because the dollar is still the most powerful currency, the most used. The euro, the yen, the Chinese currency yuan, they're still far behind. So we may like the idea of like for instance, India tried to do this rupee-ruble trade with the Russians. But we're not selling the Russians enough. So what are they going to do with the rupees? So we have to find ways. We are working towards it, and I think the very conversation has rattled the Americans. They don't like it. But de-dollarization is going to take longer than a lot of people think.
And then just speaking of dollars, rupees, rubles, what do you think of India continuing to trade with the US in terms of oil under the fact that the US has effectively said that they allow India to do so? And what do you think that reflects on India's strategic autonomy and importance on the global stage?
I think India's strategic autonomy has been evident since you mentioned oil. The fact that we kept buying from Russia, despite the lectures, despite the very harsh words. India has always Indian diplomacy is very unlike your Wolf Warrior diplomacy that the Chinese and the Americans increasingly engage in. We don't believe in standing on rooftops and saying, oh, you did this, name calling. No. India's approach has always been very collaborative. And yet, we continue to buy oil from Russia. You could say, why isn't the government coming out and saying that we do not need the American permission and so on? I mean, that's been the talk. But the effort that India is trying to make here, even with the Iran situation, is that how do you secure your interests first? Your businesses will suffer if you do not have favorable trade terms with the Americans, and that is a fact. Will making a brash statement help it? No. So a mature way to approach it is to have the adult conversation inside the room, not on social media. That is how India has always approached this. So you talk to the Russians, you talk to the Europeans, you talk to the Americans, and you do what suits you. So even with Iran, the first thing that New Delhi is trying to do is to ensure that you have enough gas supplies. Because see, the unfortunate reality of our world is that Americans are largely insulated from the war that their government unleashes on the world. And the others are having to pay the price for that. So for a policymaker in India or in Sri Lanka or in Nepal, the focus should be not on matching the rhetoric, but on making sure that the shock is limited to your people.
Just on the note of changing world order and what's going on, if I look at the Indian subcontinent, we have got, let's say, a volatile situation in almost every country around us, be it Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Nepal, Pakistan, Afghanistan, like this to say the least. And how much of a threat do you think just the geographical positioning of India with respect to its neighbors and neighbors that are so volatile and that are so open to, let's say, so-called outside investment, and how do you see that India should position itself in this order?
I think geography has not dealt a good hand to India. You cannot change it. So, unfortunately for the neighbors who thought that they could pick a fight with India, they cannot change it either. So the president of Maldives can win an election by saying India out. But when Indian tourists stop going, then the president comes to India and the ministers come to India and they hold these big events saying come to Maldives, and suddenly they're friends. So it's a reality that everyone has to live with. The smaller states again do need investment, and so sometimes there are regimes, there are governments that feel that it may help us if we play India against China.
Yeah.
But I think increasingly they've seen that unless it serves the immediate political interests of some party, for the country it has not helped. Same with Sri Lanka. The whole leaning towards China under the Rajapaksa government, and then the economic collapse, and then the Chinese refused to renegotiate the terms of their loans, whereas India helped them get the $4 billion lifeline. So increasingly, countries in the neighborhood, barring the one to our left, have realized that working with India is the way to be, and so has India. It's not like India has not made mistakes in the past. You cannot have you cannot be overbearing just because you're a bigger country. You cannot intervene unless asked to. These are proud, independent people with a long history, just like ours. So we have to find a way to work together. And India has never imposed its worldview on anyone. So yes, the neighborhood is not easy, but we are not into the business of regime change. So we'll have to live with the governments that those people vote for.
And then just to follow up on that, do you think there is going to be a point in the future where India sort of comes closer to or surpasses China as a lender in the South? And how do you think, financially, to countries, and how do you think India is going to be able to do that without having extensive political influence within those countries and effectively maintain a more neutral stance than other lenders in the area have?
That is not a risk because we don't have those checkbooks yet. But yes, with aid, strings are attached, always. I think I would like to believe that with India it will be more transparent. In China, today if the Indian government decides our budgetary allocations, there's a special allocation for the Ministry of External Affairs, and you can read in that breakup how much aid is going to which country. It is very transparent, anyone can access that information. It's not the same with China. You don't know where the funding is coming from, who is giving money to whom, what are the terms, what are the interests. It is not clear. So I'm inclined to believe that if India becomes a lender at par with China, it will still maintain that transparency, and the taxpayer and the voter in India will have the right to ask, why is this money going there and what are we getting in return? So because we are a successful democracy. We are an effective democracy. We have more checks and balances.
Understood. And then just speaking of transparency and objectivity, I know you in the past pushed back on certain outlandish Western journalistic opinions. Do you think it is still a truth that a journalist can be effectively neutral, or do you think there's always some sort of inherent bias, for lack of a better word, agenda that pushes them towards their opinions?
I think human beings are not unbiased. And until I'm replaced by AI, I'm not unbiased either. So no, journalists are not unbiased. Neutrality is a good word to hide behind. The first newspaper in India was Hickey's Bengal Gazette. It was against the British, right? So the media has always raised issues and taken sides, and that should be okay. But are you taking a side because of some monetary gain? Are you taking a side because you're trying to help someone? Or are you taking a side because you believe in something? If there is a scam, are you going to take the side of the scamster and say, this person also deserves, or her point of view or his point of view is equally important? Or are you going to, I think that I would be biased towards the people who've been wronged. Every time the media raises issues like these, everything is a manifestation of your bias. Which is the top story and which is not the top story? That too is bias. What makes to the front page and what makes to the 10th page? So your bias shows in the words that you use, in the choice of stories that you pick, in the point of view that you amplify. I think that in the age of social media, a better approach would be, as I said in my previous conversation, to have an honest conversation with your audience and say, this is what I think, but you're free to take a call. These are the facts of the case, this is where I stand. And that is what I do.
Just switching a bit to UK-India relations now. If you look at the bilateral relation between the two countries, especially UK post-Brexit and India repositioning itself globally, do you think this relationship can become more strategic in nature, or do you just think it will remain transactional in the future as well?
Strategic can be transactional, right?
True.
Yeah.
But just to reframe my question, sorry. Could we expect more of a depth in the relationships and more strategic autonomy coming in these two bilateral, these two countries?
I think the UK-India relationship is strategic. But I think inherently relations between two countries are transactional. Simply because for any head of state, their first responsibility is towards their people. And I think that's something that India has mastered. In a world where countries are trapped in blocs and alliances, we look for alignment based on issues and ideas. And that is not fence-sitting. That is strategic autonomy in my mind. So yes, the India-UK relationship is only going to get stronger because the UK's traditional ally/partner has proven to be not so reliable. I think that for decades now, the UK as a strategic power has been punching well above its weight, only because of its alliance with Washington. And now that it's coming undone with the US president routinely insulting the UK Prime Minister, they will have to look for better friends.
Okay, sorry, one last question, then I'm gonna move into the next segment. I'm just picking your mind on this, let's say the recent events that happened with Israel, Iran, or anything for that matter. Could you just walk us through the first time you heard of it? What was your situation like? You're like, okay, now I have to report this, I'm gonna have to talk about these things, these are the things I have to do. Can you just walk us through maybe a day when you get such an important piece of news, how do you deal with it?
Like I said, it invariably comes on a weekend. I'm trying to spend time with my children, and then someone calls and says, okay, this attack has happened. So, for instance, the Iran attack. Again, I heard of it on Saturday, and I think you trained. I've been doing this for so long that it doesn't take me very long to make up my mind. And I said, I'm coming. Can you call the team because we'll do the show today? And when I started calling people, they said, I'm already on my way. Because I think they know what the drill is. So it's a very efficient team. They get there. In a conflict or in a developing story, a big story, I think anyone who wants to be a journalist, the newsroom is the best place to be. It is so exciting. I can't tell you. People are, there's information coming in. People are sharing things in real time. Everyone's trying to pitch in. If you've seen the show Newsroom, there's a lot like that. Only nobody claps for me once the show is done. But otherwise, yes, it's quite exciting. So that's what we do. And I remember I had to travel on Sunday. And so I told my team on Saturday night that, okay, the war has started. Unless something very big happens, I'm not coming tomorrow. So they said, define very big. And I said, if XYZ dies. And it happened. So yeah, I was in Chennai that day and I had to do the show from the Chennai studio. I remember. So these things happen all the time. Or when the Israel war broke out, you know instinctively, like 1:30 I'm in office and by 4 o'clock I'm calling up the Israeli embassy and saying, I want a visa. So, yeah, we figured something out. So I think there's something that kicks in.
Yeah.
And it's a great time to be in the newsroom because everyone's, it's a bit like when just before the exam, all your faculties are working 100%. If someone gives you one formula, you will know it then.
Yeah.
So it's a bit like that. It's very good.
Thank you so much for being so patient answering all our questions. We have a small rapid fire round. Just it will take 2 minutes and then we have the questions. Ma'am?
So starting off with a really tiny question, not a big one at all. Is there a moment that defined your career?
Yes, when I left news and then came back.
And then just on to the next one again. CNN, WION, First Post, which phase do you think shaped you the most?
Oh, that's very tough. WION.
And then just looking back, is there a story you wish you covered differently?
I know it's supposed to be rapid fire, but I have to story I wish I covered that. Maybe 2611. I was in the studio for most of it. I would have liked to be on the ground.
Okay. One country to watch out for in the next decade, not India.
South Africa.
Interesting. Most misunderstood geopolitical conflict today.
I would say Ukraine.
Okay. And one global leader you find strategically impressive.
No. Strategically impressive, but yeah.
The way they go about things is just like wow.
We all know.
Macron.
Not get his budget passed. No, I don't know.
I'll skip past one that you don't find impressive. Truth or speed, what matters more today?
Truth.
One narrative that you think is widely misreported?
The whole American democracy project.
Now to the easiest questions of the night. Tea or coffee before the show?
Before a show.
Yeah.
I Actually, before the show I have tea and during the show I have coffee.
One country you love visiting the most?
UK, I would say, is great. I also like to go to Israel a lot.
Interesting. If not journalism, what would you be doing?
Making saris.
And last question from my end before we hear from the audience. One word your team will use to describe me.
Late.
I mean, if they're running on time, then yeah. Can we please have a good round?